Hey everyone, Sam here. Thanks for joining me. I hope you're having a beautiful day wherever you are in the world. So, are you feeling inspired to get some painting done? Good, awesome. Well, you're going to like this video. Because in this video, I'm going to show you this fishing boat scene that I painted, inspired by the island of Guernsey. And I was on a visit there a few years ago because I've got a lot of family that live in Guernsey. And as always, I had my camera with me, taking reference photos for potential paintings. And even though it's a few years later, I've now finally gotten around to painting this scene. So in this video, I'm going to give you some tips on painting fishing boats. And even though this is more of a marine painting, I treat it just like a landscape painting, so I still pay attention to my colours and my values to create the atmospheric depth within the painting. I also want to keep that painting looking painterly and gestural as well. So we'll talk about that in the video. In the meantime, sit back, relax, and let's roll the tape. I'm painting on a 12-inch by 16-inch linen panel, and it's a medium weave Belgium linen that's oil primed and made by a company called Seascape at canvaspanels.com. Now I'm sketching out the composition here with a #1 round brush and burnt sienna mixed with liquid. And as I sketch out the composition, I'll go over how I get the proportions of the boat right. Now I apologise here because as you can see from the video footage, the very first part is missing, and that's because the video file unfortunately got corrupted. So the quite important information about how I got the lean and the proportion of the boats correct as I started sketching out the composition is missing, but what I'll do is I'll explain how I got these proportions of the boat with the photos here and the sketch that I've got out so far on my painting. So what I did with these boats was I just identified the major planes within the boat and just made marks as reference to the orientation of the boat and the proportions. So if we have a look at this photo, what I did was I identified the planes at the stern of the boat and then the cabin as well, which was pretty much in the same alignment, and also marked in a line from the stern of the boat to the front of it, and then recreated those lines on my canvas as I started sketching out the composition and then working out the rest of the boat around it. And then afterwards, once I'd started sketching out the proportions of the boat, I then just wiped off those lines that I'd marked in. Now, I'll tell you straight away, I am no boating expert whatsoever, so please forgive me if I get some of these boating terms wrong, but I'll do my best. I'll go over the idea behind the composition. It loosely follows a steel yard composition, and this is where you have a large mass in the foreground that's counterbalanced by a smaller mass that's in the midground or the distance. And this is a good composition to use in landscape painting and was used by many historical painters, including Edgar Payne. The whole composition is generally simple and it implies balance. So here I've got the fishing boat here, the main focal area of the painting. This is the largest mass, and then it's counterbalanced by the boat that's in the midground on the left side of the painting. Now if you want to have a go at painting this artwork yourself, I know we're only at the start of the video here, but I've written a blog post for it, and there's a link in the description below, and I also have a full-length version of this on my Patreon channel. I painted this artwork in oils, but you could just as easily use acrylics instead. The colours I generally use for landscape and seascape paintings include titanium white, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, cadmium orange, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue and phthalo green. And the brand of paint I'm using is Blue Ridge Oil Colours, and these are really nice paints to use, a nice artist quality oil. And if you want to get your hands on some Blue Ridge oil paint, I've put the link in the description box below. So let's get into adding some colour to this thing. As I say in most of my videos, the first thing I think about is where are all the dark values and shadows in the scene that I'm painting. So even though this is a marine painting, a boating scene, I still treat it just like a landscape painting. So the first thing I'm thinking about is where are my dark values, and value refers to how light or dark a subject is. So we'll find our darkest darks and our lightest lights in the foreground. Then as that value scale narrows, as we move to the distant landforms, darks are not as dark and lights are not as light. So as I said, I'm painting my dark values and shadows first. For the purpose of this video, I'm just going to focus on giving you some tips on painting boats. The two boats here that are the subject of this painting are both painted white, so the shadows in these boats are going to be lighter than they would be if they were a different colour. Obviously, white is the lightest that we can go in terms of value. So most of my shadows in the scene here across this whole painting are going to be mainly neutral greys, and I'm going to edge my mixtures more on the blue side so they have a blue cast to them. So across the board here with these shadows, I'm mainly using varying combinations of ultramarine blue with burnt sienna, alizarin crimson and titanium white. Now burnt sienna is a dark orange, so when that combines with the blue, it cancels it out and desaturates it, and that's because orange is opposite to blue on the colour wheel. The alizarin crimson will give my mix a violet tint to it, and then I'll be making value adjustments with the titanium white. Titanium white also helps to desaturate your colour. So here I'm marking out areas of the shadows on the stern and the hull of the boat, and the stern on the boat on the left side of the painting in the midground. Whenever I start a painting, I try and use the largest brushes I can possibly use, and I mainly paint with flat brushes as I love the marks that you can create with them. The brand of brushes I'm using are Rosemary & Co brushes, and if you want to get your hands on some Rosemary & Co brushes, I've put the link in the description box below. I definitely recommend these brushes. I've been using them for years and they also last a long time as well. The shadows in the distant headlands are going to be much lighter than they would be as if they're in the foreground. And also the cloud shadows are going to be light as well, as sky and clouds are some of the lightest values to be found in the landscape. Again, I'm using the same colours for the shadows in these clouds and the distant headlands as I've used in the boat, so a mix of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, titanium white and a little alizarin crimson. Obviously I'm going to be using more titanium white in the mix to get the value lighter. Back to the boat in the foreground, and the darkest value in the painting is the outboard motor, as this is black. And you can create your own black with a mix of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Again, that dark orange opposite to blue on the colour wheel, so we can create a near black with this colour. And I never actually use pre-made black because I find it deadens the colours a little bit. I prefer to mix my own black, so pre-mixed black is a colour that I never use. Once I've marked out the main shadows in the boats and the clouds and the distant headlands as well, I work from the furthest zone away, the sky and clouds, and then start working forward in the painting. So painting some of those highlights in the clouds, which is a mix of titanium white with some burnt sienna, and also the sky, which is just a simple mix of ultramarine blue and titanium white. Then I paint those distant headlands. I'm keeping the colours desaturated here so that they don't leap forward in the painting. A lot of colour drops out as you go into the distance, especially green, so when I mix the greens here, I'm using lower chroma colours such as yellow ochre mixed with ultramarine blue and titanium white, and that will make a really desaturated green. If I need to, I can also round off the green with either a burnt sienna or alizarin crimson. The sea is a mix of ultramarine blue, yellow ochre, titanium white and a little bit of phthalo green. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're painting is to maintain and create colour harmony. So colour harmony is where the colours just work with each other and your painting reads well. So when the viewer looks at your painting, they'll think, wow, those colours look nice. And they might not even know why the colours work so well together. Well, it's because there would be colour harmony in the painting. And the way we can create this is by using similar colours throughout the painting where it's possible. So in this case, I'm using a lot of ultramarine blue throughout the painting. It's in the shadows, it's in the sky, I've got it in the sea, and then also some of these other colours I'm using, such as burnt sienna and alizarin crimson and yellow ochre. So for example, when I paint the sand here, which is a low chroma yellow colour, I'm using a mix of yellow ochre with a little alizarin crimson, some ultramarine blue and titanium white.
And as I said, these colours I've used elsewhere in the painting, so it's tying all these zones together. This is also part of the reason why I don't like to have too many colours on my palette, because I just feel like it overcomplicates things as well. So I prefer to keep my palette more simple, and it also means I'm much more likely to use all of these colours throughout my painting. And the other thing about using a more limited palette is it helps to improve your colour mixing skills. Now, as I was blocking in this painting, obviously I'd got the main areas of shadows established within the boats, but then after that I painted everything else around it, so the sky, the sea and the sand, and then I came back to the boats. And when I came back to painting the boats, this is where I started marking in the areas in the full sunlight. What I've done here is I've used a mix of titanium white, but also added a little bit of burnt sienna, ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson, and that's because I want to keep the value of the white a little bit darker, so that when I come to add the final highlights later on, I can just layer some of that over the top, and that will make it look much more realistic and make those boats look much more alive. In general, we want to hold off on our tones as we work through the painting. Just keep those values a little bit darker and work in those lighter values as you build up the detail within the painting, and then save the lightest values at the end. So here I was painting the light values on the stern of the boat and then around the cabin as well. Once I'd done this, I'd added a few details to the boat in the foreground, just getting it ready so that once the painting's dry, it's going to be easier to add the details later on in the painting. But it was here that I let the painting dry, and at this stage, when you've just blocked in a painting, you want to make sure that your colours and values are working, and that you have plenty of room to add your lighter layers as you build up the detail in your painting. Now, once my painting was dry, I was able to then start adding detail to the whole thing. And for the first session that I worked on it, after it was dry, I mainly worked on the sky and clouds in the background, the distant headlands, the sea and the sand as well. And I actually had to make a bit of a value readjustment to the sand, as I felt like the colour was a bit too saturated and a little bit too dark, so I made that sand lighter and more pale. But during this particular painting session, I didn't really do anything to the boat. It was all about the background and the elements surrounding the boat, making sure that that's all working. Then once that's sorted, I can go to town on the boats, adding more detail and all the other things that need doing. I let the painting dry again, and then on my next session, I returned to the boats. And what I did here was I started adding more highlights, so the areas of the boat that are in the full sunlight. I'm using, again, titanium white with a little bit of burnt sienna, ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson, but much, much less. So you'll see here that the value is lighter than my previous layer. I've also even mixed in a little bit of yellow ochre as well to warm up the white. There's quite a lot of detail to be added in the boats here, and one thing I use to steady my hand is a mole fork. My hand can be a bit shaky sometimes, and I don't always get the steadiest of marks, so a mole fork is really handy for fine detail work. And if you want to get your hand on some mole forks, I've put the link in the description box below. In my opinion, it's an essential piece of kit to have in your studio. During this session, I obviously added some details to the boats here, mainly the highlights, but I also added details to the beach and sand just to make it look more interesting. Now, in the reference photos, there was lots of fine pebbles and things like that, and quite often when I'm painting landscapes or seascapes where there's thousands of little pebbles, I really can't be bothered to just sit there painting every single one, and also I feel like it's distracting from the composition as well, just having too much information. So I've simplified it, and I've added a few stones here and there on the beach, and then also later on I was adding bits of seaweed as well. So just to make it interesting enough, but not overcomplicate it with too much detail. For the stones, for the most part, I've used a mix of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, alizarin crimson and titanium white, the same colours I've used in the shadows in the boats and the distant headlands and clouds. Again, keeping that colour harmony. When I was painting this, I actually did it over a few evenings, and the beauty of using Liquin Original is that it helps to speed up the drying time of the paint as well as improve the flow, so the painting was drying quickly. So on this next particular session, I just focus on painting finer details on the boat, such as the borders around the windows, also the numbers on the side of the boat. I'm using much smaller brushes here, mainly number 0 round brushes. And of course, if you need to steady your hand, this is a good opportunity to use your mole fork. Now for the last final session of this painting, this is where I add my last details and final highlights. So some of those areas of the boats that are in the full sunlight where I'm adding my lightest values, but also I added a few more details to the beach, such as painting in seaweed, for example. For the final highlights that I added to the boats, this is a mix of titanium white with just a dash of yellow ochre to warm up the white, and I added some of these highlights sparingly so that as to create a 3-dimensional form within the boat. There was also other things to add, like the highlight on the shiny outboard motor. This is pretty much just a white dot. And I was able to use that white mix as well to paint a couple of seagulls in the distance. I like painting seagulls in seascapes and marine paintings. I think adds to the atmosphere and story of the scene that you're painting. Now if you want to learn more about painting boats, seascapes, landscapes, all that good stuff, then subscribe to my channel and give it a thumbs up. I'm going to be painting more boats in the future as well, so stay tuned for that. And if you want to have a deeper delve into landscape painting, then check out the free resources I have on my website, which includes my painting blog, where I've got loads of free written painting tutorials and reference photos for you to use if you want to have a go at painting them yourself. And then I have full-length painting tutorial videos for sale from my website, and this is where we go on a much deeper delve into a particular subject of landscape painting, and I'll show you how to paint an artwork from start to finish. I explain art theory so you can learn that as you paint, and I also show you how to mix all the colours, which I demonstrate on my palette. Now you can also get instant access to all of these videos and more by subscribing to my Patreon channel for just $5 a month or $51 a year, where you save 15%. And each month you get a new full-length painting tutorial video. You also get lesson notes and reference photos as well if you want to have a go at painting any of the artworks that are featured in the video. And I have a Telegram group as well where you can chat to other artists and share your artwork as well, so that's pretty cool. And lastly, all these things I'm giving away and promoting here. I'm giving away a free ebook called Introduction to Oil Painting, which you can get by subscribing to my email list on my website at samuelert.com. All the links for everything that I've just mentioned are in the description box below. So I hope you enjoyed this video and that it inspires you to paint some boats. I hope you're having a beautiful day wherever you are in the world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.